Today we will talk about the International Court of Justice. As you know, there is a huge military conflict is going on between the Ukraine and the Russia. And on the ongoing military conflict between the Ukraine and Russia, basically Ukraine has filed an application to the International Court of Justice to look at the matter or convention of genocide. What is the main convention we will talk about, and we will talk about the International Court of Justice. But before we have to look at the basic background and the charter of United Nations Charter, basically the Article 7. So now what is the basically the issue? If you talk about the Donbas region, basically Donbas region consists of two actually districts, you can say, of Ukraine, and which has been declared independent by the Russian Federation, and that region is basically the Donetsk and the Luhansk, if you talk about. And on the basis of that, actually Russia has launched the special military operation on the Ukraine. So what is the Article 7? If you talk about the UN Charter, said actually that if there is any country is acting as a genocide on particular state, even as a district or even a village, on the basis of that another countries can attack on that country. This is clearly written in the Article 7. On the basis of that, actually Russia actually attacked and that launched a special military operation on the Ukraine. So this is very important if you talk about, and that is not called an war. It is completely a special military operation while using the Article 7 of the UN Charter. And that's why. So after that, what happened? Actually Ukraine filed an application to the International Court of Justice to initiate proceeding against the Russian Federation, if you talk about, to under the Convention on the Prevention of Punishment and Crime of Genocide. So now the Ukrainian want to know that Ukrainian has launched any genocide on the Donetsk and the Luhansk. So that, and because that Russia has launched an attack on Ukraine, and that's why Ukraine want a justification from the ICJ or look at the whole matter. So remember that on the basis of that, actually the Russian Federation has launched an attack known as the special military operation. If you talk about the application, now what are the demands under the application? If you talk about Ukraine, the firstly is the groundless claims of Russia to occur genocide in Donbas region, which popularly known as, basically it consists of two districts, Donetsk and Luhansk, and that's why. So there is a groundless claim has been done by the Russia and launched an attack in Ukraine, and that's why this application has been filed by the Ukraine at the International Court of Justice to look at the matter. Another, if you talk about, what said that Russia has no lawful basis to take military action on the basis of those false claims. This is said by the Ukraine. As I have already told you, the Article 7 of the United Nations Charter has been used by Russia to launch an attack, a special military operation on the Ukraine. So this is very important. So obviously there is a legal standing, you can say, in the favor of Russia. So this is very important. And obviously if ICJ will decide, then ICJ will look at the matter and give a final judgment. So remember that. If you talk about, Ukraine has also requested to the ICJ to exercise its authority to indicate provisional measure to preserve the Ukrainian rights and limit ongoing and irreparable harm to the Ukrainian people and its sovereignty. Now the third demand of the Ukrainian, that take a provisional measure, means if you talk about the immediate action against the Russia to look at the Ukrainian people and its sovereignty. So these are the demands under the application has been put by the Ukrainian. Now we will talk about what is the International Court of Justice. So if you talk about the International Court of Justice, then remember that Ukraine has filed, and this dispute is basically concerning the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime against the Genocide, so popularly known as the Genocide Convention, and which formed in 1948. So this is very important. So now if you talk about the International Court of Justice, then remember that principal judicial organ of the United Nations. So it is one of the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, very important if you talk about. Now if you talk about the headquarter is basically in Hague, Netherlands. Remember that very important from exam point of view. Headquarter is in Hague, Netherlands. So this is very important, and it is the only principal organ which is actually located outside the New York, United States of America. So remember that if you talk about. Now if you talk about the establishment, then remember that in June 1945 the establishment of ICJ took place by the Charter of United Nations, and it is a successor of the Permanent Court of International Justice. If you talk about, there are the League of Nations and the Permanent Court of International Justice. Now the successor of League of Nations is the United Nations, and the successor Headquarter of the Permanent Court of International Justice, if you talk about International Court of Justice, which is established in June 1945 and began work in April 1946. Remember that. If you talk about the last judge of the Permanent Court of International Justice, became the first president of the International Court of Justice, popularly known as the Jose Gustavo. If you talk about which was from the El Salvador, and this is the which country which recently declared as the cryptocurrency as a legal tender official currency of the El Salvador. So this is very important. Further, if you talk about the International Court of Justice, then remember that if you talk about the role, then remember that basically the role is to settle dispute in accordance with the international law. Remember that while concerning the parties. So remember that if you talk about international law, legal dispute submitted it to be by state and to give advisory opinion on legal question referred to it by the authorized UN, United Nations organs and specialized agency. Basically to settle the matter on the basis of international law, or if there is any legal concern arises by the two parties, then basically according to the United Nations Charter and any law which concerning that parties actually give the advisory opinion to that state is the main role of the International Court of Justice, if you talk about. Now if you talk about it, what are the jurisdiction, mean what are the areas which actually concerning the matter of ICJ. So remember that if you talk about all the members of the United Nations are automatically parties to the ICJ. So there is no issue of the membership in the International Court of Justice, if you talk about. But while hearing the case, both parties' consent is needed. This is the very important point, because Ukraine has filed an application, but it is not acceptable in the International Court of Justice, because if the Russia is not agreed, only and when Russia is agreed, then matter will be open and International Court of Justice has the power to hear the case. So that's why this point is very important, and as you know very well, Russia will not take up the issue and will not give assent to the heard the matter in the ICJ. So this is very important. And concerning about the sovereignty, boundary and maritime dispute, basically the trade and natural resources are the areas, etc. are the areas which is actually heard by the International Court of Justice. So this is very important. If you talk about the judgment of the International Court of Justice is final and binding on the parties. Remember that very important point. Judgment of the International Court of Justice is binding on the parties. And ICJ means the International Court of Justice has no way to ensure compliance. It is completely depends on the willingness of the party to either implement the judgment of the International Court of Justice or not. So this is very important. If you talk about the election related to the member of the International Court of Justice, then remember that basically ICJ consists of the 15 judges, and currently India is a member of the International Court of Justice, and one of the judges out of 15 judges is an Indian member, if you talk about, and elected for the 9-year terms by the United Nations General Assembly and United Nations Security Council. This is very important. So both the bodies actually elected these 15 members, and remember that basically the absolute majority is needed. So absolute majority, even one member cannot deny, and that's why there is a multiple voting or multiple times of voting actually took place during the election of the 15 judges related to the International Court of Justice, because of the absolute majority is needed in the United Nations Security Council, which consists of 15 members. And if you talk about the United Nations General Assembly, which has more than 119 countries. So remember that, as I have already told you, the absolute majority is needed in both the bodies, United Nations General Assembly and United Nations Security Council. And elections are held in the UN Headquarter, New York, because the United Nations Headquarter is basically situated in the New York, and that's why the election is actually held there, and members are situated actually in the Hague, Netherlands, because the International Court of Justice Headquarter is in the Hague, Netherlands. If you talk about now, this is all about the International Court of Justice. Now if you talk about in short the Genocide Convention, then remember that basically this is a convention of 1948. What is happened after the World War I? So there is a huge genocide took place in the World War II, and if you talk about after that, there is a Genocide Convention, and popularly known as 1942 crime against the genocide, if you talk about. So it is an international law that actually defined the genocide for the first time, and judgments related to the genocide is binding on all the parties, irrespective they have ratified the Genocide Convention 1948 or not. So this is all about the International Court of Justice and Genocide Convention. If you talk about the main point, then remember that Ukraine has recently filed an application against the Russian Federation to look at the matter of genocide under the Convention of Genocide Convention 1948 at the International Court of Justice. This is very important. And Russia has used the Article 7 basically to attack on the Ukraine, known as a special military operation, remember that, and not war. If you talk about the main points related to the International Court of Justice, then remember that technically binding, the judgment is technically binding on the parties, but it has no way to ensure compliance. This is very important point. It has the 15 members, remember that, elected by the both bodies, popularly known as United Nations General Assembly and United Nations Security Council. Absolute majority is needed by in the both the bodies, popularly known as the United Nations General Assembly and United Nations Security Council. If you talk about, remember that its headquarters is in the Hague, Netherlands, and it is the only principal organ of the United Nations which is located outside the New York, United States of America. So this is all about the International Court of Justice. And if you talk about the Genocide Convention 1948, then the first time actually is defined the what is actually the genocide, and its binding related to the judgment related to the Genocide Convention is binding on all the parties irrespective of the ratification. Means either country has ratified or not, irrespective of the condition, decision will be binding on both the parties. So thank you guys, hope you like this video. You should subscribe my channel. Thank you so much for watching this video.